When I woke up from the coma after 6 months, my father was there pretending to be the suffering man. But at the welcome home lunch, when he tried to hug me, I screamed the truth in front of the whole family. It wasn't the fall, Grandpa. It was him who threw me against the wall. That day, my grandfather delivered the justice that the law would take years to provide. Hi there, my dear ones. Look who's here to chat with you today. I'm Grandma Celia Morrison, and I'm 74 years old with a lifetime of stories to tell. I live here in the small town of Cedar Falls, Alabama, in the heart of the South, where the sun shines warm and folks still know how to be neighborly. I'm sitting here in my kitchen, in this wooden chair that my late husband Earl made for me over 40 years ago. Next to me, you can see my old cast-iron stove that I still use every single day. Nothing beats the taste of food cooked the old-fashioned way, children. You know what I was doing just before I turned on this camera? I was preparing fresh biscuit dough for my grandchildren who'll be coming home from school shortly. It's a tradition we have here in this house. Every afternoon when they arrive, there are warm biscuits waiting for them, with fresh butter and homemade jam that I make myself. I started this tradition when my first grandbaby, little Johnny, was just 5 years old and would come home from school always hungry, his eyes bright with expectation. Y'all don't know the joy it brings to see those little ones running through the gate, backpacks on their shoulders, calling out, "Grandma Celia, Grandma Celia." It's music to these old ears, my dears. After the biscuits, they sit right here at this very table, doing their homework while I start preparing dinner. The smell of herbs and fresh vegetables always fills my kitchen in the late afternoon, mixed with the sweet sound of their laughter. You know, my children, this simple routine filled with love wasn't always the way things were in my life. There was a time, back in my childhood, when the kitchen in the house where I lived was a place of fear, not comfort. When the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway meant danger, not protection. But God is so good, you have no idea. He brought me through to this place, gave me the chance to build a family where love is the rule, not the exception. Today I look at these grandchildren of mine. There are 4 in total, 2 girls and 2 boys. And my heart fills with gratitude. They run, they play, they make messes, they knock things over, and I'm right there laughing, helping to clean up, giving kisses where it hurts. Never, ever, a harsh word or a heavy hand. Because I know, my dears, I know very well what it's like to grow up afraid in your own home. That's why I decided to tell you my story today. It's not easy stirring up these old memories, but if my pain can help some child going through something similar, or help some family understand that there are different ways to raise children with love, then it's worth opening up this old heart. Before I start my real story, I want to make a special request of you who are watching. If you're enjoying this chat with Grandma here, don't forget to hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel, okay? And that notification bell too, so you don't miss any of my stories. And you, my dear ones watching me now, tell me in the comments, what little town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? In the morning with your coffee, after lunch, or already in the evening? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Tell me, will you? Let's create a chain of love. The story I'm going to share with you happened many years ago when I was just an innocent little child back in my hometown. A story about how sometimes the people who should protect us are exactly the ones who hurt us most. But it's also a story about how true love, when it finally appears, has the power to heal even the deepest wounds of the soul. I was born in 1951 in a small town called Millerville, right here in Alabama, deep in cotton country where the sun beats down hard and life has always been tough. My mama was named Betty Sue, a tiny woman in stature but big in heart, with those brown eyes always tired and hands calloused from so much work. She had a habit of humming softly while doing housework, always those old songs her mama had taught her. My daddy was Robert, a tall man with broad shoulders who worked loading cotton bales and grain sacks at the town market. To anyone looking from the outside, he was hard-working, serious, respected by the neighbors. Our house was small, wood frame with a tin roof, just 3 rooms, the front room that also served as my parents' bedroom, the little room where me and my 2 brothers slept. There was Wesley, 3 years older than me, and little Aaron, 2 years younger, and the kitchen in the back with a wood-burning stove and a crooked wooden table that my daddy had made. The floors were rough pine boards, always swept clean by my mama, who spent all day taking care of the house and us 3 children. I remember well the routine of those times. We'd wake up early before the sun came up, with the neighbor's rooster crowing. Mama was already in the kitchen making breakfast, usually grits with eggs when we had them, or cornmeal mush with molasses and milk when the hens weren't laying. The smell of coffee percolating filled the whole house. After breakfast, we'd walk to school, about a 20-minute walk down the dirt road. I loved that part of the day, my children. At school, I felt free, could play with the other children, laugh out loud, run around the dusty playground during recess. The teacher, Miss Johnson, was sweet to me, always praised my neat handwriting and how I applied myself to my studies. She was an older woman with gray hair pulled back in a bun who treated all of us with a mother's kindness. The games of those days were simple but fun. We played hide-and-seek among the houses in the neighborhood, ring around the rosy in the schoolyard. Us girls would jump rope made from old rags. I had a corn husk doll that my mama made for me, with yellow yarn hair and little dresses sewn from fabric scraps. It was my most precious treasure. I slept hugging it every night. But when afternoon came, and it was time to go home, my dears, that's when my chest would tighten up. Because we never knew what mood my daddy would be in when he came home from work. Some days he'd come home calm, sit in the rocking chair on the porch, ask Mama to bring his food, and just sit there quiet, listening to the old radio play country music. On those days, the house had peace. But there were other days. Oh, my children. There were other days when we could hear his footsteps on the street and knew the storm was coming. He'd arrive with his face dark, talking loud, complaining about everything. The boss, the heat, the food being cold, the noise we were making. Any little thing would serve as an excuse. If one of the plates wasn't in exactly the right place, if I left my doll in the front room, if my brother Wesley forgot his shoes by the door, if little Aaron cried for any childish reason. My mama lived in a constant state of alert, always trying to guess his mood, getting everything perfect, telling us to stay quiet, quiet. "Celia, honey, go play out back," she'd say softly when she saw him coming home upset. "Take your brothers and don't make any noise, you hear?" And all 3 of us would run to the back of the house, trying to hide, trying not to exist. I was 6 years old when I learned there were 2 versions of my father. The Robert that the neighbors knew, always greeting everyone on the street, helping when someone needed to carry something heavy, talking about work and football at Joe's General Store. And the Robert who lived inside our house, who exploded over any little thing, who said children had to learn to behave, that in his day nobody got away with nonsense. Discipline, he called it. "Y'all are going to learn respect," he'd say, whenever one of us made some childish mistake. And heaven help anyone who questioned it. Mama had already learned not to interfere, just watched from a distance with those sad eyes, hands trembling, whispering softly, "Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy." What hurt me most, my dears, was seeing the fear in my little brother's eyes. Wesley, even though he was older, would shrink into the corner when the yelling started. And little Aaron, poor thing, only 4 years old, already knew he couldn't cry loud when he got hurt playing, because then he'd have something real to cry about. And that's how I grew up, my children, learning to walk on tiptoes inside my own home, to speak softly, to not leave anything out of place, to not be a child. Because being a child in our house was far too dangerous. It was on a day in January 1957, right in the middle of Alabama's scorching summer heat, when everything truly began, my dears. I had just turned 6 the month before, still a little child who believed the world was a safe place, that parents existed to protect their children. How wrong I was. I remember that particular day, My mama Betty Sue had gone to Mrs. Patterson's house next door to take some eggs that our speckled hen had laid. It was customary among the women in the neighborhood, this trading. One day it was eggs, another day it was flour, a way for one to help another when times got tight. She left me watching my little brothers. Wesley was playing in the yard with some sticks, pretending they were cars, and little Aaron was napping in the front room. I was in the kitchen, trying to reach a glass on the high shelf to get some water. It was a regular glass jar, one of those that came with store-bought preserves that Mama bought sometimes at the market. I climbed on a chair, stretching my arm as far as I could when the glass slipped from my little hand. The sound of glass shattering on the wooden floor echoed through the whole house like thunder. Little Aaron woke up startled and started crying. It was at that exact moment that I heard Daddy's heavy footsteps coming from the street. My heart raced, my dears. My little fingers started trembling as I tried to pick up the glass pieces with my bare hands, cutting myself in desperation. Blood dripped on the floor, mixed with the tears that were already starting to fall. What was that noise? Robert's voice echoed through the house like a wild animal's roar. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face red from sun and anger, those dark eyes fixed on me. When he saw the scattered pieces and blood on my fingers, he didn't show one bit of concern. Only pure rage. "Naughty girl, didn't I tell you children can't touch things without permission?" He approached slowly, like a predator circling its prey. "Look at the mess you made. Your mama's going to have to clean up all this because of you." I tried to explain, with a trembling voice. "Daddy, I just wanted some water. I couldn't reach the glass from the lower shelf." But he didn't want to hear any explanation. He never did. "Water?" He laughed, but it was a laugh without joy, full of meanness. "Since when do children give orders in this house? You should have waited for your mama to come back. But no, little miss wanted to play grown-up, didn't she?" That's when it happened, my children. For the first time in my life, I felt my father's heavy hand across my face. A slap so hard it threw me to the floor, right into the middle of those glass pieces. The physical pain was terrible, but the pain in my heart was even worse. Because up until that moment, no matter how angry he got, he had never laid a hand on any of us three. "Did you learn now?" he asked, looking down at me on the floor while I tried to get up with my knees scraped on the glass. "Or do you want me to teach you properly what happens to disobedient children?" At that moment, Mama came running. She had heard Aaron's crying from a distance and came to see what was happening. When she saw me on the floor, bleeding, and saw Robert's expression, she understood everything immediately. "Dear Lord, Robert, what happened? The child is all cut up." She ran to pick me up, cleaning the blood from my cuts with the hem of her own dress. "Your daughter broke the glass on purpose, just to spite me," he lied shamelessly. "Climbed on that chair knowing she wasn't supposed to, made a huge mess. Had to learn that in my house there are rules." Mama looked into my eyes, and I saw that she knew I hadn't broken the glass on purpose. But I also saw fear in her look, fear of her own husband. She just whispered, "Celia doesn't do mean things, Robert. She's a good child." "Good child?" he yelled even louder. "Good children don't break things in the house. Good children obey. And if you can't raise this girl right, I'll do it my way." And that's how, my dears, my nightmare began. From that day forward, any little thing I did, or that he thought I had done, became reason for discipline. If I laughed too loud playing with my brothers, I got scolded for making a ruckus. If I cried when I got hurt, I got scolded for putting on airs. If I left any object out of the place he thought was right, came the lesson. And with each lesson, the violence got worse. It started with slaps, then came pushing, then punches. He always said the same thing. "It's for your own good, girl. The day you learn to behave, you won't need this anymore." As if it was my fault, as if a 6-year-old child could control all her actions to not provoke an out-of-control adult. Mama tried to protect me when she could, always whispering for me to be careful, not to give him reason. "Celia, honey, don't touch anything when your daddy's home. Stay quiet, play just in the room, don't make noise." But how can a child live without being a child? My little brothers started changing too. Wesley, who used to be smart and playful, became quiet and always alert. Little Aaron learned to cry softly, covering his mouth with his little hands when he got hurt. Our house became a prison where all three of us were prisoners of our own father's unpredictable moods. At school, I started changing too. Teacher Miss Johnson noticed I was quieter, more withdrawn. "Celia, honey, you seem so sad lately." "Did something happen?" she would ask with kindness. But how could I tell? Daddy always ended his lessons with the same threat. "If you open your mouth to anyone about what happens inside this house, next time will be worse. Much worse." And I believed him. I was a 6-year-old child who believed that if I told anyone, something terrible would happen. So I lied to everyone. "No, Miss Johnson, everything's fine. I'm just tired." And she would worry, but didn't push. At home, I learned to walk on tiptoes, speak softly, not touch anything, to be invisible. But no matter how hard I tried to be perfect, there was always something, always an excuse for the next discipline. And with each passing day, I understood less why my father, who was supposed to love and protect me, was the person who hurt me most in the whole world. The years that followed were like living in a minefield, my dears. Between ages 6 and 10, I learned that a child can survive almost anything, but the price of that survival is far too high. My father, Robert, turned our house into a place where fear lived in every corner, where silence was the only protection we had. The violence grew like a poisonous plant. What started with one slap became a daily education system. Waking up in the morning became a lottery. Would I manage to go unnoticed today? Would my little brothers not do anything to irritate him today? But it was impossible, my children. How can 3 small children live without making noise, without playing, without existing? I learned to recognize all the signs, the way he slammed the door when he came home from work, the sound of his footsteps in the hallway. When they were slow, there was still hope for peace. When they were heavy and fast, the storm was coming. The tone of voice he used to speak to Mama. If it was harsh from the first "good afternoon," it was better for me and my brothers to disappear. The lessons became more creative and more cruel. If I dropped food on the floor, it wasn't just a slap. He would force me to eat off the floor, saying that's how dogs eat. If I forgot to put my cornhusk doll in exactly the right place, it became a present for the stove fire while I watched, crying. "Messy children don't deserve toys," he'd say, with that cold smile. My Mama Betty Sue was wasting away along with me. She tried to intercede sometimes, but that only made things worse. "Betty Sue, you're raising this girl spoiled. If you don't know how to discipline, leave it to me. I know how." And then his fury would turn on her too. How many times I saw Mama with a black eye, telling the neighbors she had run into a door. How many times I found her crying softly in the kitchen, hands shaking while she prepared lunch. The worst part was the constant humiliation. He wasn't satisfied with just hitting. He had to destroy from the inside too. "Look at this ugly, stupid girl. Who's going to want something like that when she grows up?" "Mrs. Patterson's daughter is the same age as you and already knows how to do everything right. You're dead weight in this family. If it wasn't my obligation, I'd put you out on the street today." Those words hurt more than the punches, my dears, because a hurt on the body heals, but words stay carved in a child's soul forever. I started believing I really was ugly, stupid, a burden. I started thinking I deserved all of it. At school, I became a shadow. Teacher Miss Johnson tried to cheer me up, asking why I was always looking down, why I didn't play with the other children at recess anymore. But how could I explain that at home I was learning I didn't deserve to play, didn't deserve to smile, didn't deserve anything but beatings? I invented 1,000 excuses for the bruises that appeared. I fell out of bed. I ran into the door. I tripped on a rock. Miss Johnson would look at me with those worried eyes, but in those days, my children, people didn't interfere in family matters like they do today. Children got whipped by their parents, and it was considered normal, even necessary. My little brothers were changing too. Wesley, who was only 3 years older than me, took on the role of protecting us as he could. When he heard Daddy's voice getting angry, he'd run to the room and signal for me and Aaron to hide under the bed. We'd stay there, clinging to each other, listening to the shouting, the arguments, praying softly for the storm to pass. Poor little Aaron, only 4 years old, developed strange behaviors. He started wetting the bed every night, and that became another reason for correction. 4-year-old boy wetting the bed like a baby. I'll teach you to control that. And there would be another beating for the little one, who would cry so hard he'd run out of breath. Food became a weapon too. If any of us didn't eat everything on our plate, he'd force us to eat even if we were feeling sick. Food is sacred. While I'm killing myself working to put food on this table, y'all are going to eat every last crumb. Once, Aaron threw up on his plate because he had a cold and the food wouldn't go down. Daddy forced him to eat the vomit too. Now you'll learn not to waste. I started having terrible nightmares, my dears. I'd dream I was running away, running through endless fields, but could never get anywhere. I'd wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, heart racing. Other times I'd dream I could fly away from that house, that I had wings like the birds and could escape to where no one would hurt me anymore. During the day, I started living in a fantasy world inside my head. I'd pretend I had another family, that I lived in a house full of flowers where everyone laughed and played together. I'd pretend I was Miss Johnson's daughter, who treated me with kindness every day at school. It was the only way to bear reality. The violence escalated to the point where I was always hurt. Purple arms, scratches on my back, belt marks on my legs, always covered by clothing, of course. Mama taught me to lie better. If they ask, you say you fell out of the tree in the yard. If they ask again, you say you slipped in the mud after the rain. And that's how I grew up, my children, learning that children are worth nothing, don't deserve love, exist only to obey and get beaten. By age 10, I was already an old girl inside, tired of living, with no hope that things could ever be different. But the worst was yet to come. Because gradually, I was becoming a child who was no longer afraid to die. And that's dangerous, very dangerous, because when you're not afraid to die anymore, you might do things that, well, that can change everything forever. It was on an afternoon in March 1961, my dears, one of those suffocating hot afternoons in Alabama, when the sun feels like it's going to melt the earth and the air gets heavy as lead. I had just turned 10 the month before, but I already felt like I had lived 100 lifetimes of suffering. I was in that state of soul that only those who've been through what I went through can understand. When a child has suffered so much, they don't feel anything anymore. No fear, no hope, no will to live. It was like I was a rag doll that gets beaten and beaten, but doesn't break because there's nothing left to break inside. On that particular day, which would change my life forever, my mama Betty Sue had left early in the morning to take some washed clothes to her employer, Mrs. Whitman, who lived in the nicer part of Millerville in a big house with a yard full of flowers. It was a little job she did 3 times a week to earn some extra money, because Daddy's money never ever lasted the whole month. We always lived tight, always something missing. "Celia, honey," she had told me before leaving, with those tired eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "You watch your little brothers and start fixing lunch for your daddy. Put the beans on the stove at 11:40, stir them now and then, and don't forget to season them with the chopped onion that's in the bowl. I'll be back before he gets home." But the world had other plans for that day, my dears. Mrs. Whitman ended up asking Mama to wash some more pieces, arrange some extra chores, and time kept passing without her realizing it. Meanwhile, there I was in our little house, a 10-year-old child playing mother, taking care of 2 little brothers and preparing food for a whole family. I put the beans on the stove like she told me, adjusted the wood fire just right, Let them cook slowly. Wesley was in the yard playing with some pieces of wood, pretending they were ships sailing on an imaginary river. I kept an eye on him through the kitchen window while I stirred the beans and made sure they didn't burn. That's when I heard whimpering coming from the bedroom. It was Aaron, who was now 7 years old but still small, skinny, always getting hurt. I ran to see what had happened and found the poor little thing fallen on the floor next to the bed. He had tried to reach a little toy that was on top of the old trunk and ended up falling, hitting his right knee on the wooden corner. "Ow, ow, ow, it hurt, Celia, it hurt bad," he cried, holding his little leg, tears rolling down his thin little face. The knee was swelling up, turning purple. My big sister heart squeezed tight, seeing that little child suffering. I picked him up, even though he was getting big, and carried him to the kitchen. I wet a cloth with cool water, put it on the hurt. "Calm down, little brother. Mama will be back soon and make a home remedy for your boo-boo," I said, stroking his hair, trying to comfort him. "You're strong, right? Little men don't cry too much." I spent about 15 minutes there, taking care of him, humming softly those lullabies Mama used to sing to us when we were little. Aaron was calming down gradually, stopping his crying, resting his little head on my shoulder. It was a sweet moment, my dears, one of those rare moments of peace in our house of suffering. But that's when my life fell apart for good. When I went back to the kitchen to stir the beans, the smell was wrong. Smell of burning. Smell of disaster. I ran to the stove and saw the horror. The beans had stuck to the bottom of the pan, that heavy iron pot that was one of the few valuable things we had. The water had all dried up. The beans were black, charred, and thick smoke was rising toward the ceiling. My heart stopped. Literally stopped. I looked at that smoking pot and knew, with the certainty that only a traumatized child can have, that my life was going to change that afternoon. Because Daddy always came home at exactly noon for lunch, he was punctual as a clock when it came to food. And when he got there and saw there was no lunch, my little fingers started trembling violently. I tried desperately to save what I could. I got water, tried to unstick the beans from the bottom of the pot, tried to at least save some beans that weren't completely burned. But the more I stirred, the worse it got. The burning smell spread through the whole house, stuck to the walls, the low ceiling, every corner. Dear God, what am I going to do? I whispered to myself, tears already starting to fall. Daddy's going to kill me. He's really going to kill me this time. And I knew I wasn't exaggerating. In recent months, his violence had increased so much that I was always hurt, always afraid that one day he'd go too far. That's when I heard it. Those heavy footsteps I knew by heart, that woke me up in the middle of the night just from remembering. Coming down the dirt road, kicking up dust, approaching our house. It was noon, and Daddy was coming back from work at the market, hungry, expecting to find food ready on the table. My soul left my body from fright. I ran to the room like a madwoman, grabbed Wesley and Aaron, who was still limping from his hurt knee, and whispered, desperately, "Hide under the bed, now, and don't come out. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens to me, stay quiet, quiet as mice." Both of them looked at me with those wide eyes of pure terror. They already knew, poor things, had already learned that when I spoke in that tone of total panic, it was because the storm was coming. I saw them crawl under the old bed, clinging to each other like two frightened birds, trembling with fear. My heart broke into 1,000 pieces seeing my little brothers in that state, but there was no time to comfort anyone. The sound of footsteps was getting closer and closer, more threatening. I ran back to the kitchen and stood there in the middle of the smoke, waiting for the inevitable. At that moment, my dears, something strange happened to me. Instead of feeling the usual fear, I felt a kind of cold peace, as if my soul was already preparing to leave this world. At 10 years old, I was no longer afraid to die. And that's terrible, my children. When a child reaches that point, it's because they've already died inside long ago. "Where's my lunch?" His shout echoed through the house like thunder in the drought. "No, hello, No, how are y'all? Not a bit of concern about where his wife was or if the children were okay. Just pure rage, just demands, just violence waiting to explode. When he entered the kitchen and saw the scene, the burned pot, the smoke, the horrible smell filling everything, his face transformed into a mask of hatred that chilled my blood. His eyes turned red as coals, his fists clenched, and I knew I wouldn't come out of there alive. "You idiot! You useless! You wretch!" He screamed so loud the walls seemed to shake. "Can't even watch a pot. Where's your mama? Why'd she leave a stupid child like you taking care of my food?" I tried to explain, voice trembling. "Daddy, Aaron fell and got hurt. I had to take care of him. It was an accident." But he wasn't listening anymore. His mind had already decided I had to pay, and pay dearly for ruining his sacred lunch. "Ruined my food? Then you won't eat for a week. Let's see if that teaches you to value things." And it began. First was a slap so hard it threw me against the wall. Then another, and another, each one more violent than the last. But this time was different, my dears. This time I didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't try to run. I just stood there, looking into his eyes, with a calmness that made him even more furious. Because he fed on his victim's fear, and I was no longer giving him the satisfaction of seeing me terrified. "Won't cry? Think you're tough? I'll show you who's boss in this house." He grabbed my arm with brutal force, dragged me across the kitchen floor like I was a sack of potatoes. I felt the bone in my arm almost breaking in his hand. That's when he picked up the burned pot itself, still hot from the coals, and raised it in the air like a weapon. "Want me to burn you like you burned my food? Is that what you want, you wretch?" And it was at that moment, my dears, that something inside me broke once and for all. It wasn't fear I felt. It was a cold rage, an absolute certainty that if I didn't do something, he was really going to kill me that day. And in a strange way, I was almost at peace with that possibility. I looked deep into his eyes, with courage I didn't know I had, and said in a voice that didn't even seem to come from my mouth, "Do whatever you want to me. I'm not afraid of you anymore. I'm not afraid of anything." The effect was immediate and terrifying. He became possessed with rage, like he had turned into a wild animal. He threw the pot on the floor with all his strength, making a crash that must have woken the whole neighborhood, and came at me with violence I had never, ever seen before. "You wretch! You devil! I'll teach you respect. I'll teach you to never open that mouth to me again." He grabbed me by the hair, dragged me across the kitchen floor like I was an animal, and then, my dears, it was like the world exploded in my head. He grabbed me by the hair with one hand and lifted me off the floor, and with the other hand took my head and... I can never forget the sound it made when my head hit the corner of the brick wall. It was like a giant bell had rung inside my skull, a loud metallic sound that echoed through every corner of my soul. The last sound I heard were my little brother's desperate screams, who had come out from under the bed and saw everything. "Celia! Celia!" they screamed, but their voices seemed to come from very, very far away. After that, my dears, there was only darkness, a darkness deep as a bottomless well, darker than the darkest night, where there was no pain, no fear, nothing but infinite silence. For 6 long months, my soul floated in that darkness, while my little child's body fought between life and death in a hospital bed. And while I fought to survive, unconscious and defenseless, my father played the role of his life out there, the suffering, desperate father whose dear little daughter had suffered a terrible domestic accident. When I opened my eyes for the first time after 6 months of darkness, my dears, it was like being born again. But it wasn't a beautiful birth, full of joy. It was like coming back from a very distant, very cold place, where I had almost stayed forever. The first thing I saw was the white ceiling of the hospital in Birmingham, with those water stains that looked like gray clouds. The second thing I felt was the most terrible headache a person can imagine, like 1,000 hammers were beating inside my skull at the same time. "She's awake! She's awake! Doctor, come quick!" It was Mama's voice, Betty Sue, who was there beside me, holding my hand. When I managed to turn my head slowly, very slowly, I saw she was unrecognizable. She had lost about 40 pounds. Her hair was completely white. It used to be brown, and her eyes were red from so much crying. She looked like an 80-year-old woman, not 40. "My daughter, my dear little daughter," she whispered, kissing my forehead, tears dripping on my face. "You came back to Mama. You came back." I tried to speak, but only a hoarse, strange sound came out. My throat was dry as sandpaper. My tongue felt like paper. The doctor, a tall, thin man called Dr. Harrison, came running with a nurse. They did some tests, shined a little flashlight in my eyes, had me squeeze their hands, move my toes. "It's a miracle," the doctor told Mama, shaking his head. "With the head trauma she had, honestly, we didn't expect. But she'll need lots of rest, lots of care. The brain is still recovering." In the following days, still half dazed, half confused, I gradually remembered what had happened. The memories came back like pieces of a terrible puzzle. The burned pot, Daddy's fury, the horrible sound of my head hitting the wall. And along with the memories came something I had never felt before. A cold, calculated anger mixed with courage I didn't know where it came from. Mama stayed at the hospital with me all day, sleeping in an uncomfortable chair next to my bed. During the long afternoons, while I was still too weak to get out of bed, she told me what had happened in those 6 months. How Daddy had come screaming to Mrs. Whitman's house. "Betty Sue, come running! Celia fell off the roof. She's all broken up." "He said you had climbed on the roof to get a kite that was stuck," Mama told me, her voice full of bitterness. "Said you slipped and hit your head on the corner of the wall." Everyone believed it, child. I believed it myself. Until what, Mama? I asked, still with a weak voice. She looked around, checked that no one was listening, and whispered, "Your little brothers, Wesley and Aaron. The first week, when you were here in the hospital, unconscious, they started having terrible nightmares. They'd wake up in the middle of the night screaming, saying they had seen Daddy hurt you. I thought it was trauma, you know? From seeing you hurt." My heart started beating faster. "And then?" "Then one night, Aaron woke up crying really, really hard and said something that chilled my blood. Mama, Daddy didn't tell the truth. Celia didn't fall off the roof. We saw him grab her by the hair and bang her head against the kitchen wall because the beans burned." And Wesley confirmed everything, down to the smallest details. I felt a mixture of relief and terror. Relief, because finally someone knew the truth. Terror, because I knew that when I left the hospital, Daddy was going to be even more dangerous. A man who beats a child until they have a head trauma doesn't get better, can't be fixed. "Mama," I said, squeezing her hand tight, "when I get out of here, he's going to really kill me. Next time, he won't stop." She shook her head, eyes full of tears. "No, my child, there won't be a next time. I already sent word to your Grandpa Theodore." Grandpa Theodore was Daddy's father, a man in his 70s who lived on a small farm about 2 hours from Millerville. He was known throughout the whole region as a man of his word, one of those old-time men who doesn't tolerate cowardice in any way. He had raised 5 sons, Daddy was the youngest, and always said that a man who hits women and children isn't a man, he's an animal. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "The truth," she answered, with determination in her voice I had never heard before. "I told him everything. The years of beatings, the humiliation, and now this." He was silent on the other end of the line for about 5 minutes. Then he just said, "Betty Sue, when the girl gets out of the hospital, you let me know. I'm going to organize a welcome home lunch for her, a lunch the whole family will attend." I knew what that meant. In Southern culture, when the family patriarch calls everyone for a lunch, it's not just to eat. It's to settle accounts, to deliver justice, to put things right. During the rest of my time in the hospital, While I slowly recovered, Mama told me what those 6 months had been like. Daddy, the cynical wretch, had played the role of suffering father to perfection. He came to the hospital every day, cried in front of the doctors, received condolences from neighbors and acquaintances. Poor Robert, people said, working so hard to support his family, and now with the girl in this condition. What a heavy cross for a father to bear. If they only knew that he was the one who had made the cross. The worst part was that he came to visit me, stood there beside my bed when I was unconscious, holding my hand, whispering, "Daddy's little girl, you need to wake up. Daddy misses you." In front of the doctors and nurses, of course. Pure theater, pure lies. But my little brothers couldn't hide anymore. Every time he came near, they would shrink, tremble, hide behind Mama. Poor little Aaron had developed a stutter and wet the bed every night. Wesley had almost completely stopped talking, only answered when asked something directly. After 2.5 months in the hospital, when the doctors said I was well enough to go home, Mama called Grandpa. "Pa Theodore, Celia's getting discharged next week." "Then I'll send out the invitations," was his response. "Next Sunday, noon, at my farm. Welcome home lunch for my granddaughter. The whole family will be present. And tell Robert it's not an invitation, it's an order. Anyone who doesn't come isn't family anymore." During that last week in the hospital, my dears, I felt something strange growing inside me. It wasn't fear anymore, wasn't desperation. It was a kind of hope mixed with thirst for justice. At 10.5 years old, after spending 6 months between life and death, I was finally going to have the chance to tell the truth in front of the whole family. The Saturday before discharge, Daddy came to visit me for the last time. He stood there beside me, doing his usual theater for the nurses, talking about how happy he was that I was coming home. But when we were alone for a few minutes, he leaned down close to my ear and whispered in that cold voice I knew so well, "I hope these months have taught you to behave. Because at home, nothing's changed. Same rules still apply. You obey, or you learn the hard way." I looked right into his eyes and answered, with a firm voice that surprised me, "It's going to be different now, Daddy. Very different." He laughed in that cruel way. "Different how? You think because you got sick I'm going to feel sorry for you? Spoiled children never learn." "Tomorrow at Grandpa's lunch," I said, still looking straight into his eyes, "I'm going to tell everyone what really happened that afternoon. I'm going to tell them it wasn't any accident." The color drained from his face. "You little wretch, if you open that mouth—" "What are you going to do?" I asked, with courage I didn't know I had. "Hit me again? In front of Grandpa Theodore, Uncle Walter, Uncle Isaac, the whole family? I'd like to see you try." It was the first time in my life I saw fear in Daddy's eyes. Real fear. Because he knew that the next day, at the farm lunch, for the first time in his life, he was going to have to answer for all those years of cowardice and violence. And I knew I was ready to speak the truth, no matter what it cost. And here I am today, my dears, 74 years old, with a lifetime of experiences, sitting in my kitchen in Cedar Falls, Alabama, preparing biscuits for my grandchildren coming home from school. I look at these wrinkled hands mixing the dough and think about everything these hands have been through, everything this heart has suffered and overcome. It's hard to believe that the woman sitting here today, surrounded by love and peace, is the same child who almost died at 10 years old at the hands of her own father. After that memorable Sunday at Grandpa Theodore's farm, that Sunday that changed my life forever, my story took completely different directions. I went to live with my paternal grandparents on the little farm, along with my little brothers Wesley and Aaron, and Mama Betty Sue. Daddy. Well, Daddy spent a good while recovering in the Birmingham hospital, and after that he was never allowed near us again. The whole family united to make sure of that. It was on Grandpa Theodore's farm that I learned what a real family is, my children. I learned that children can laugh out loud, can run, can get into mischief, can even break something without getting beaten. I learned that when we get hurt, we get comfort, not scolding. I learned that fathers and mothers exist to protect, not to harm. Grandpa was a man of few words, but much love. Every morning he'd call me to go with him to milk the cows. "Come here, little granddaughter," he'd say in that gruff but caring voice. "Come learn how to take care of the animals." And there I'd go, still little, but learning that caring is a good thing, a beautiful thing. Grandma, Mrs. Dorothy, not the neighbor, that was her name, was a wonderful baker. She made the most delicious sweets in the world: creamy fudge, white coconut candy that melted in your mouth, peanut brittle that was just perfect. And she always called me to help. "Celia, my dear granddaughter, come stir this peach preserves. But slowly, with care, because sweets don't like to be rushed." It was she who taught me to really cook, with love, with patience. Everything I know today about making good food, I learned from her in that big farmhouse kitchen, with the wood stove that heated the whole house and perfumed everything with the smell of cinnamon and cloves. I grew up there on the farm until I was 15, my dears. I studied at the little school in town, made real friendships for the first time in my life, learned to be a child even though I was almost a teenager. My little brothers also recovered from those terrible years. Wesley started talking normally again, became a happy, playful boy. Little Aaron stopped stuttering and wetting the bed, became a smart and loving boy. When I turned 16, I met my future husband, Earl, the same name as the neighbor back in Millerville, remember? Destiny has those funny coincidences. He was the son of neighboring farmers, a 20-year-old young man, hard-working, respectful, from a good family. But most important, he had gentle hands, a soft voice, never yelled at anyone. We courted for 3 years, always with the utmost respect, always under the watchful eyes of Grandpa Theodore, who had become my real father. When I turned 19, we married in a simple but beautiful little celebration right on the farm, complete with fiddle music, square dancing, and lots of country music all night long. I came to live here in Cedar Falls in 1970 when Earl got a good job with the city. We bought this little house, small but cozy, where I am to this day. 3 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen that's the heart of the home, and a backyard with a peach tree, apple tree, and a little herb garden. I still tend today. I had 4 children with my Earl, my dears. 2 boys and 2 girls. Joseph, who's now a bus driver. Mary, who works at the elementary school. Frank, who became a mechanic and has his own shop. And little Grace, who became a teacher and teaches at the same school where her sister works. And what joy it was to raise those children. For the first time in my life, I knew what it was to educate with love, teach with patience, correct without violence. When they acted up, and they did plenty, like all normal children, I would sit down, talk to them, explain why they couldn't do that, give educational consequences when necessary. Never, ever a heavy hand. Because I knew firsthand what that does to a child. My husband Earl was a partner in everything. Hard-working man, loving, who came home from work and helped with the children, played in the yard, insisted on eating dinner as a family every single day. We lived 52 years together, my children. He passed away 3 years ago from heart trouble, but it was a whole lifetime of companionship and true love. Today, at 74, my greatest joy is my 4 grandchildren. Johnny, 12 years old, Mary Beth, 10, Luke, 8, and little Anna, 5 years old. They are the light of my eyes, the reason I wake up excited every day. Every afternoon when they come home from school, it's the same joy. They run through the gate calling, "Grandma Celia, Grandma Celia," and come straight to the kitchen where there are always warm biscuits waiting. They sit at this table where I am now, do their homework while I prepare the afternoon snack, biscuits with butter, fruit smoothies, cornbread, homemade cookies. And what freedom they have, my dears. They run through the whole house, play in the yard, make messes, laugh loud, sing, make up games. Sometimes they knock something over, break a glass, make a mess. And me? I laugh along, help clean up, Give kisses where it hurts if they get hurt. It's nothing, sweetheart. Grandma will clean this up real quick. Because I know, deep in my soul, that happy children are children who can be children. Who can make mistakes without getting beaten. Who can cry when it hurts. Who can laugh when they're happy. My grandchildren will never know what it's like to be afraid inside their own home. Will never know what it's like to walk on tiptoes, to not provoke an out-of-control adult. On weekends, when my children come for Sunday dinner, and they always come because keeping family together is a tradition I insist on maintaining, this house becomes a celebration. The big dining room table fills up. There's laughter, conversations, grandchildren running from one side to the other. And I stand there in the middle of it all, serving food, listening to everyone's stories, grateful to God for giving me the chance to see love conquer hate. I still keep in touch with my brothers today. Wesley became a successful businessman in Mobile, married, had children, is a fulfilled man. Aaron became a teacher, lives in Huntsville, also started a family. All three of us talk every week, and whenever possible, we get together to remember, not the bad times, but the good times that came after. Mama Betty Sue lived to be 85, long enough to know all her grandchildren and some great-grandchildren. She died in peace, surrounded by love, knowing she had raised good children despite all the difficulties. She's buried here in Cedar Falls Cemetery, and I visit her every Monday, take flowers and talk to her about the family. It's funny how life comes full circle, isn't it, my dears? That child who almost died at 10 is now a 74-year-old grandma, surrounded by love, living in a city she chose to rebuild her life in. Cedar Falls became my true home, the place where I built my family, where I learned to be truly happy. Every day when I wake up and see the sun coming through my kitchen window, I thank God for every moment of this new life He gave me. For showing me that love is always stronger than violence, that true family is the one that protects and shelters, not the one that hurts and destroys. And that's why I'm here today, telling you my story, my dears who are watching me. Because I believe that all pain can be transformed into hope. All suffering can become strength to help other people. My dear ones who are watching me at this moment, we've come to the end of this story that cost me so much to tell, but needed to be shared. I know it was heavy to hear. I know it touched your hearts, because it deeply touched mine too, as I remembered every detail of this journey. But I want y'all to know something very important. I didn't tell my story to awaken pity or compassion. I told it because I learned over these 74 years of life that our pain can be transformed into strength, our scars can become wisdom, and our suffering can become hope for those still going through what I went through. If there's a child, anywhere in this world, who is living right now what I lived, walking on tiptoes inside their home, hiding bruises with long sleeves, making up excuses for injuries, thinking they deserve to be treated with violence, I want that child to know, you don't deserve this. You never deserved it. You never will deserve it. It doesn't matter what they tell you, doesn't matter how many times they repeat it's for your own good, or that you asked for it. No child provokes adult violence. Children break glasses, make messes, cry, laugh loud, forget to put things where they belong. That's being a child. And those who should protect you are exactly the ones hurting you. This isn't discipline. This isn't love. This is pure cowardice. I learned that when we keep the truth just to ourselves, when we're afraid to speak, the monster gets stronger and stronger. But when we have the courage to tell someone we trust, a teacher, a neighbor, a family member, an authority, that's when things can change. That's what happened to me at that lunch on Grandpa's farm. The truth freed not just me, but my whole family. And for you who are parents, mothers, uncles, aunts, grandparents, teachers, neighbors, open your eyes. A child who's too quiet, too obedient, always afraid, always making up excuses for injuries, might be silently asking for help. Ask with kindness, offer a friendly ear, be the trusted person that a traumatized child needs to find courage to speak. I also want to speak to those people who went through what I went through, but are already adults. Maybe y'all think it's too late, that time has passed, that there's no point in seeking help or justice anymore. But it's never too late to free yourself from the chains of the past. It's never too late to seek counseling, to talk to someone, to understand that the blame was never yours. For a long time, even after becoming an adult, even after building my beautiful family, I still carried inside me that hurt 10-year-old child. I still heard Daddy's voice saying I was ugly, stupid, worthless. I needed lots of talks with wise people, lots of prayer, lots of love from my family to understand that those words were lies from a sick man, not truths about who I was. Today I know I'm a strong woman, a mother who knew how to love, a grandmother who knows how to protect. I know I have value, that I deserve respect, that my life had purpose, and you who went through similar situations deserve to know that about yourselves too. Violence can break our bodies for a while, can hurt our souls deeply, but it can't destroy our capacity to love and be loved. It can't steal our dignity or our future. If I could do it, y'all can too. If I could rebuild my life, y'all can too. In every country, in every community, there are people and organizations ready to help. Look for information about protection in your area. Talk to local authorities, community leaders, people you trust. Human dignity is a universal value. No matter where y'all are, we all deserve to live free from violence. And always remember, love is stronger than hate. Truth is more powerful than lies, and a community that cares united together can overcome any form of cruelty. When we come together to protect our most vulnerable, we create a better world for everyone. My dears, my grandchildren of the heart who made it to the end of this painful but necessary story, now I need y'all in a very special way. If this story touched your hearts, if you recognized someone who needs help, or if you simply believe we need to talk more about protecting children, then do this for this grandma here. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell, because this channel will continue bringing stories of overcoming and hope. And for me to know that y'all watched to the very end, that you listened with your hearts to all my pain and my victory, I want you to write in the comments just one word: courage. Just that. Just this word. Because it was courage that saved me at 10 years old. It was courage that brought me here, and it will be courage that can save other children today. Do this now. Don't wait another minute. Because every subscription, every comment, every share can take this message to someone who needs to hear that it's possible to survive and be happy after the storm. God bless each one of you, my dears, until our next conversation. Every night, my husband would lock our 19-year-old daughter's bedroom door. I'd hear the bed creaking for an hour, then absolute silence. When I discovered what he was doing in there, my world collapsed. Hi, my dear ones. God bless each and every one of you on the other side of this screen. My name is Margaret Ellen Sullivan. I'm 52 years old, and I live here in Marietta, Georgia. This charming little town in Cobb County, just northwest of Atlanta, known for our beautiful town square and the annual Taste of Marietta Festival that brings the whole community together. I was born right here, in this blessed land, and this is where I planted my roots. Oh, my dear friends, you don't know how much I love this art of baking. I started about 3 years ago when a neighbor on my street taught me. Mrs. Henderson, God rest her soul, she's passed on now. She used to make these cornbread muffins that were absolutely divine. One day, I was walking past her house and smelled that wonderful aroma coming from her kitchen. Mrs. Henderson, I said, would you teach me how to make those muffins? And she welcomed me with open arms. Every Saturday morning I'd go over there, bring the ingredients, and we'd spend time kneading dough, talking about life, about our children, about our struggles. It was like therapy, you know? Today I make cornbread, biscuits, banana bread, cheese rolls, and there's always extra to share with the neighbors. I love seeing their happy faces when I deliver a warm bag to their door. This morning, before recording this video for you, I just finished a batch of cheddar biscuits. The smell is still filling the whole house. It's a recipe I learned from my mother-in-law, God rest her soul, modified a bit the way Mrs. Henderson taught me. I stand there in the kitchen, hands in the dough, and it feels like all the problems in the world stay outside. And you, my dear friends watching me now, tell me in the comments, what little town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with breakfast, after lunch watching TV, or later in the afternoon when things settle down? I always read all the comments and get so emotional knowing where you're from and when you take time from your busy day to listen to this grandmother's stories from Marietta. Tell me, will you? Let's create a chain of love that goes from Georgia across the entire country. Oh, and don't forget to hit that like button down below and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales, because I have many more stories to tell you. Hit the bell too, because there's a new video every week from this grandmother. But listen, folks, today I came here to talk to you about something very serious, a situation I lived through years ago that completely changed my life. It's about my daughter, my Julia, and about how sometimes we can live with someone for years and not truly know who they are inside. A story that left me heartbroken, but ultimately brought me a strength I didn't even know I had. Look, my dear ones, for you to fully understand this story, I first need to tell you about my family and what life was like when I was a child, right here in Marietta. I was born in 1973, in a small house on Maple Street, close to the downtown square. My father was named James Sullivan, a strong name, isn't it? And he worked as a construction worker. My mother, Eleanor, took care of the house and us children. There were 4 of us, me, the oldest, then my brother Thomas, 2 years younger, my sister Dorothy, and the baby William. Our house was small, brick with vinyl siding, with 2 bedrooms in front and 2 in back. We had a big backyard where my mother planted her herbs, mint, basil, rosemary, and there was always a peach tree loaded with fruit that was our joy in the summer. I remember as if it were yesterday the mornings in our house. I'd wake up early to the sound of the neighbor's rooster, Mr. Peterson's. My mother was already in the kitchen, turning on the stove to make coffee. The smell of coffee mixed with the aroma of whatever she was baking is a memory I hold dear to this day. She'd always make cornbread or buttermilk biscuits to go with it, and we'd sit at the kitchen table, a small wooden table my father had made himself. My father would leave early for work, always with the lunchbox my mother prepared, a sandwich, some chips, maybe some leftover meatloaf when we had it, and always sweet tea in a thermos. He was a hard-working, honest man, but quite serious. He wasn't much of a talker, you know. But when he came home, he'd always bring us something. Candy, a donut he bought at the corner store, or old newspapers that we loved to make paper airplanes with. My childhood was simple, but full of joy. I played a lot with the girls on the street, hide and seek in the late afternoon when the sun was low, hopscotch on the driveway, and my favorite game was playing house. I'd make dollhouses under the peach tree with broken tiles I found around the yard, little stones that became furniture, and big leaves that served as blankets. My best friend was named Patricia. She was the daughter of Mrs. Whitmore, who lived 2 houses down from ours. Patricia had beautiful curly brown hair that her mother always tied with colorful ribbons. We 2 were inseparable. We'd invent games. We'd make pretend food with mud and leaves, play school. I always wanted to be the teacher and she the student. And when it rained, we'd spend hours on the porch listening to stories Mrs. Whitmore told about the old days when ladies got married in white dresses and veils. At school, which was about 5 blocks from home, I was a good student. I always loved studying. My first-grade teacher was named Mrs. Johnson, a petite lady with white hair always pulled back in a bun, but who had tremendous energy. She taught me with such care that I was enchanted with each new letter I learned. I remember she always said, "Margaret, dear, education is the only inheritance no one can take from you." I'd carry my lunch in a little metal lunchbox that my mother decorated with stickers. Inside, there were always homemade cookies and a thermos with lemonade she made herself. During recess, Patricia and I would sit under the oak tree in the schoolyard and share our lunches. Afternoons at home were full of activities. I'd help my mother with chores, sweeping the porch, feeding the chickens we kept in the backyard, helping fold laundry. I remember carrying the laundry basket, trying to help like the older girls did, and feeling important helping at home. When July 4th came around, our house became a party. My mother made potato salad, coleslaw, baked beans, and my father set up the grill in the backyard. All the neighbors would come to our house, and the kids would wave sparklers until late at night. Mrs. Whitmore always brought her brother-in-law Henry, who played guitar and sang old country songs that made the adults dance in the yard. It was a simple life, but full of love and family unity. My parents, though not overly demonstrative with affection, always took good care of all four of us. There was never a lack of food on the table, clean clothes, and especially respect. My father never raised his hand to any of us, and my mother always raised us with dignity and values. But like every family has its peculiarities, ours did too. There was something I noticed from a young age, but only fully understood years later when I was an adult and a mother myself. It was about relationships, about how people can hide dark sides behind smiles and kind words. A painful lesson that only life itself can teach. In those childhood years, running through the backyard and playing under the peach tree, I had no idea how much I would need that solid foundation my parents gave me to face the challenges that were coming. My dear ones, now I need to tell you how everything started to change in my life. It was 1991, I had just turned 18, and that was the year I met Robert. He was 26 years old, a construction foreman here in Marietta, very respected in town. Everyone knew his work. Robert Davenport was his full name. He built several houses in the new subdivisions that were popping up at the time. I met him at a wedding reception for Mr. Henderson's daughter at the church hall downtown. I remember I was wearing a light blue dress that my mother had sewn especially for the party. She always had magic hands for sewing. Robert was there, very elegant, in dress pants and a crisp white shirt. He was handsome, tall, dark hair always well combed with gel, and he had a way of speaking that impressed everyone. When he came to talk to me, I got all shy. "Miss, may I have the pleasure of knowing your name?" he said, even taking off his hat. Such manners, right? My mother, who was beside me, was so proud. "This is my daughter Margaret," she answered for me, because I was speechless from shyness. Robert started visiting me at home every Sunday after church. My father liked him from day one. "This young man is a hard worker, Margaret," my father would say, "not some bum wasting your time." Robert always brought something: candy for me, a pack of cigarettes for my father, and always greeted my mother with great respect. During our courtship, he was too perfect, you know? Today I understand that when someone is too perfect, something's wrong. But back then, at 18, I thought I'd found my prince charming. Robert was never late for dates, always well-dressed, always with a rose or chocolates for me. He talked about our future so lovingly. "Margaret, when we get married, I'm going to build you a beautiful house. It'll have 2 bedrooms, a large living room, a spacious kitchen where you'll make your cakes." We got married in March 1993. I was 20, he was 28. The wedding was small but nice, at the same church hall where we met. Robert had kept his promise. He built our new house in the Kennesaw subdivision, right here in the area. It was beautiful. White with blue shutters, with a big backyard where I planted my herbs and flowers. The first months of marriage were like a dream. Robert was affectionate, attentive, took me to the movies when there was a new film, bought me nice fabric to make dresses. I was on cloud 9. I took care of the house with so much love, made the foods he liked. He always loved fried chicken with gravy and meatloaf with mashed potatoes. It was in September 1995 that my Julia was born. Oh, my dear ones, what joy it was when I brought that girl into the world. Robert got so emotional he cried at the hospital door. "Margaret, you gave me the most precious thing in the world," he said, holding our baby girl so carefully. But it was exactly after Julia's birth that I started noticing certain changes in Robert. At first, I thought it was all in my head, you know. Those normal fatherly jealousies. He'd watch too closely when I bathed the baby, when I changed her diaper. "Margaret, don't you think you're taking too long in the room with Julia?" he'd ask, somewhat impatiently. Julia grew up beautiful, smart, but always very quiet. She wasn't a rowdy child like others. Even as a toddler, she had a withdrawn manner that caught my attention. When she turned 2 and started talking, it was always softly, as if afraid to bother anyone. "Mommy," she'd say whispering, pulling on my skirt. She was too obedient, you know. Too obedient. Robert started getting more controlling with me, too. "Margaret, you don't need to go to your mother's house so much," he'd say. "A wife's place is at home, taking care of the family." At first I accepted it, thought it was care, that he loved me so much he wanted me all to himself. My foolishness, right? When Julia turned 5, in 2000, Robert insisted she not go to daycare. "The girl is better at home with you, Margaret. Those daycares are full of diseases, badly behaved children." I thought it was strange, because all the neighborhood mothers put their children in daycare so they could learn to interact with other kids. But he was so convincing that I agreed. Julia grew increasingly withdrawn. When she had little friends over, she'd always play somewhat apart. And the worst, every time Robert came home from work, she'd run to our room and hide. "Julia is afraid of men," I'd tell myself. "It's just a shy child thing." It was when she was 8 that I started noticing stranger things. Robert had created a routine of talking with Julia every night. "Margaret, I'm going to talk to the girl about school, about behavior," he'd say after dinner. And off he'd go to her room, close the door, and stay there for a long time. At first, I thought it was nice. What a dedicated father, I'd think. He's teaching our daughter about life. But there was something that bothered me. Julia would always be very quiet during these conversations. I'd be in the kitchen washing dishes or ironing clothes, and it was a strange silence coming from the room. One night, when Julia was 9, I decided to pay more attention. Robert had just entered her room and closed the door as always. I finished putting away the dishes and went to our bedroom, which was on the wall next to Julia's room. I pressed my ear to the wall, and what I heard made my heart race. It was a rhythmic sound, like someone tapping on the bed, but tapping slowly, in a constant rhythm. And along with that sound, I heard Robert's voice speaking low. "That's right, stay still. It's for your own good." My God, my mind went to the most terrible place. Could my husband be? No, it couldn't be. Robert was an upstanding man, hard-working, respected. He must be teaching Julia something, maybe showing her a book, some exercise. But that rhythmic sound, that "stay still," my heart was pounding. I stayed there, pressed against the wall, until Robert came out of the room an hour later. When he entered our bedroom, I tried to act natural, pretending I was arranging clothes in the closet. "Robert," I said, trying to sound casual, "what were you teaching Julia today?" "Oh, we talked about respect, about obedience," he replied, already taking off his shirt. "The girl needs to learn from an early age to behave properly." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept tossing in bed, thinking about that strange sound, those words, and especially thinking about Julia's behavior lately. Always looking down, always scared, always avoiding looking at her father. The next day, when Robert left for work, I tried to talk to Julia. "Honey, what does Daddy talk to you about in the room?" I asked, while she ate breakfast. Julia stopped chewing, stared at her plate, and then whispered, "He teaches me things that girls need to know, Mommy." "What kind of things, my love?" "Things about how to be obedient, how not to bother anyone." There was something in her voice, in the way she averted her gaze, that worried me even more. But I still couldn't imagine the terrible truth that was to come. I still believed my husband was a good man, and that my mind was creating fantasies where there was nothing more than a strict father educating his daughter. How wrong I was. How terribly wrong. My dear ones, what I'm about to tell you now are the most difficult years of my life. After that first night, when I heard those strange sounds, my life became a hell of doubts and fears. For months, every night was the same torture. Robert would enter Julia's room, lock the door, and I'd be there in the kitchen or in our room, heart in my throat, trying to understand what was happening. Julia grew up, but it wasn't normal growth, you know? When she turned 10, I started noticing something different about her development. At school, teachers kept calling me in for meetings. "Mrs. Sullivan," said Mrs. Crawford, who was her 4th grade teacher, "Julia has a lot of difficulty concentrating. She always seems to be in her own world." That's when I took her to Dr. Morrison, that old doctor here in Marietta, who practiced at the clinic on South Cobb Drive. After several tests and conversations, he explained, "Mrs. Sullivan, your daughter has what we call ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. That's why she has so much difficulty in school, always seems distracted." When I told Robert, he got furious. "Doctors don't know anything, Margaret. The girl doesn't have any illness. What she has is lack of discipline, of firm education. That's why I talk to her every night, to bring order to that head." And these conversations kept getting longer, more frequent. It wasn't just at night anymore. On Saturday mornings, when I went to the grocery store, Robert stayed home with Julia. "Go on, Margaret. I'll take the opportunity to give the girl some important lessons." When I returned, I'd find Julia always very quiet, sometimes with red eyes from crying. "Julia, why are you crying, my love?" "It's nothing, Mommy. It's just that Daddy explained some things to me, and I got sad." "What kind of things?" "He said I'm different from other girls, that I need to learn to accept the things life brings, even when it hurts." My God, how does a 10, 11-year-old child say something like that? "Even when it hurts," she said. That phrase hammered in my head for weeks. I started noticing other details. Julia always had little marks on her legs. When I asked, she'd say she'd fallen at school, that she'd bumped into the corner of a table. But there were too many falls, too many bumps, and always on her legs, always in places her school uniform covered. Once, she was in the bath, and I went in to bring a towel. I saw purple marks on her back, like welts. "Julia, what's this on your back?" "Oh, Mommy, I fell off Patricia's bike." The neighbor's daughter had a bike the girls played with. But Patricia lived far from home, and Julia almost never left the house to play. Something wasn't adding up. I went to talk to Patricia's mother, Mrs. Whitmore. "Sarah, has Julia been playing a lot on Patricia's bike?" "Oh, Margaret, I haven't seen Julia at our house in a long time." "The girl hardly goes out, right?" There it was. Julia had lied. Another lie to cover something. But cover what? The worst was at night. Every single night, the same routine. Robert finished dinner, took a walk in the backyard, lit a cigarette, and then said, "Margaret, I'm going to talk to the girl." And off he'd go to Julia's room, with that key in his hand, to lock the door from inside. I'd stay in the kitchen, washing dishes, but with my ears alert. I'd always hear that rhythmic sound, like someone hitting something. And Robert's voice, always low, always controlled. "This is for you to learn. You need to understand this is for your own good. Stop whimpering and stay still." One night, I couldn't take it anymore. It was 2006. Julia was 11. Robert had been in her room for about 20 minutes. I left the kitchen and went to the room door. I pressed my ear to the wood and heard clearly, whack, whack, whack. It was a dry sound like wood hitting something, and along with it, Julia's muffled crying. It wasn't loud crying, it was soft sobbing, like someone trying not to make noise. "Stop crying. This here is to take the laziness out of your body, for you to learn to be a decent person." My blood ran cold. He was hitting my daughter. Robert was beating Julia with something, in the locked room. That's why the rhythmic sound, that's why the marks on her body, that's why she lived so scared. I ran to our room, sat on the bed, and started shaking. My legs turned to jelly. My husband, the man I loved, was torturing our daughter every night. And I, idiot that I was, thinking he was educating her. When Robert came out of Julia's room an hour later, he entered our bedroom as if nothing had happened. He was even humming softly. "Robert," I said, trying to disguise the tremor in my voice, "what do you do in Julia's room every day?" "I already explained, Margaret. Educating that girl. She's hard-headed, needs a firm hand. My father raised me this way, and I became a good man. If I don't give her some corrections, she'll become a tramp." "But what kind of corrections?" "Some spankings. Nothing major. A child without discipline becomes nothing in life." Spankings. He called it spankings. But I had clearly heard the sound of wood hitting, had seen the marks on Julia's body. Those weren't spankings. It was systematic beating, planned torture. From that night on, I couldn't live in peace anymore. Every day was agony waiting for the time Robert would go to Julia's room. And every night, I'd hear my daughter suffer silently on the other side of the wall. I tried to talk to her several times, but Julia was so scared she wouldn't say anything. "My love, if Daddy is doing something that hurts you, you can tell me." "No, Mommy, Daddy just teaches me to be obedient. He said if I tell anyone, it'll be worse for me." That's it. Now I was certain. Robert had threatened my daughter to keep her quiet. And Julia, with that attention deficit, with that innocence, didn't understand she could ask for help. The years went by, and Julia grew up somewhat damaged by life, you know? At 15, she could barely concentrate to study. She repeated 7th grade twice. Teachers always said she was intelligent, but lived in her own world, always scared. Of course she was scared. The poor girl was beaten every day at home. At 17, 18, Julia still seemed like a child. Because of ADHD and all those years of fear, she never managed to develop properly. She depended on me for everything. I chose her clothes, I combed her hair, I did her college assignments. Because Robert had gotten her a spot in an education program at a local college here in Marietta, but she could barely follow the classes. "Margaret," Robert would say, "if it weren't for me, this girl would be nothing in life. I'm the one who brings order to her head. You're too soft, too lenient. That's why I need to be firm." Firm. He called it being firm. But I knew that every night, my 19-year-old daughter was still beaten like a child, in the locked room, with something wooden that Robert hid I don't know where. And the worst part, I didn't have the courage to do anything. I was afraid of Robert, afraid of breaking up our family, afraid of not being able to support Julia and myself alone. It was cowardice on my part, I know. But fear paralyzes us in a way only those who've lived it understand. Until the day came when I could no longer pretend not to see. The day I discovered exactly what my husband did to our daughter and how it was much worse than I imagined. My dear ones, the most difficult moment to tell has arrived. It was a Monday in March 2014. I remember exactly because it was my sister Dorothy's birthday, and I had spent the whole day making a pound cake to take to her house that weekend. Julia was 19, but seemed like a 12-year-old girl by the way she behaved, always clinging to me, always asking for help with anything. That day, something happened that I'll never forget. Robert came home from work earlier than usual, around 4 in the afternoon. He was visibly irritated, huffing, throwing things anywhere. "Margaret, where's Julia?" he asked, not even greeting me. "She's in her room studying," I replied. "Studying nothing! Her college professor called me at work today, humiliating me in front of the crew. Said Julia didn't turn in an assignment, that she's missing classes, that she doesn't pay attention to what the professor says. Made me furious." My heart already raced. When Robert got angry like that, things got worse for Julia, much worse. "Robert, calm down. You know she has difficulties because of her condition." "Condition nothing. The problem is, you spoil this girl too much. But today, she's going to learn what real respect means." He went to his room, our room, and I heard him rummaging through something in the closet. My blood froze. That's where he kept that instrument he used to beat Julia. I'd never seen exactly what it was, but knew it was hidden behind our clothes. Robert came out of the room with a face I'd never seen before. It wasn't just anger, it was coldness, cruelty that made me tremble from head to toe. He went straight to Julia's room. "Julia, get up and come here with me, now!" "But Dad, I was study." "Now, I said." The shout was so loud even the neighbors must have heard. Julia came out of the room crying, already knowing what was coming. Robert pushed her into her room and slammed the door so hard the whole house shook. I heard the sound of the key turning in the lock. What happened next was hell on earth, my dear ones. It was as if Robert had completely lost control. The sounds coming from inside were much more violent than usual. Whack! 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 But now they were stronger blows, more frequent, along with Julia's muffled screams. I was in the kitchen, washing the same dishes for the 5th time, trying to do something to keep from going crazy, hearing my daughter being beaten like that. But suddenly, I heard a scream that chilled my soul. "Dad, please, I can't take it anymore. Please, stop." It was Julia screaming loud for the first time. She always endured silently, but now she was begging. And Robert responded with a voice that didn't seem human. "Shut up! You're going to learn today what happens to those who disrespect me." Whack, 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 whack. The blows became even more violent. I heard Julia cry desperately, sobbing. It was a cry of physical pain, of total despair. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran to the room door and started pounding. Robert, stop that. You're really going to hurt the girl. Get out of here, Margaret. This is none of your business. Robert, she's my daughter too. Open this door. You stay out there until I'm done. People, I never felt so small, so useless in my life. My daughter was being tortured on the other side of that door, and there I was, standing like a statue, not knowing what to do. I thought about calling the police, but what if Robert found out? What if he did worse to Julia? What if he hit me too? Fear paralyzed me completely. I stayed there, leaning against the hallway wall, crying softly and hearing my daughter suffer. After almost 2 hours, Robert finally opened the door. He came out sweating, panting, as if he'd done heavy work. He didn't even look at me. He went straight to the bathroom to shower. When I heard the shower turn on, I ran to Julia's room. My God, what I saw there destroyed me completely. Julia was lying face down on the bed, trembling, with her shirt torn on the back. Her legs were full of red marks, and she could barely move. My daughter, my dear daughter. Julia couldn't even speak properly. She just cried and trembled. I picked her up. Even at 19, she was thin, weighed like a child, and took her to my room. I gave her a painkiller, put a damp cloth on the marks, and stayed there, stroking her hair until she fell asleep. That night, while Robert snored beside me as if nothing had happened, I stayed awake thinking about something terrible. What if one day he kills my daughter? What if in one of these beatings he goes too far and kills her? It was at that moment I made the most important decision of my life. It was March 2014, and cell phones with cameras were becoming common. I had just gotten a smartphone from my brother Thomas, one of those Samsung phones with a good camera. Back then, it was new to have a phone that recorded video. The next day, while Robert worked and Julia was at college, I kept thinking about her room. I looked at every corner, trying to imagine where I could hide my cell phone in a way that would film the bed without Robert noticing. The bookshelf. Julia had a bookshelf full of college textbooks right across from the bed. If I placed the phone between the books, with the lens pointed at the bed, maybe I could film what really happened in there. But I was afraid. What if Robert discovered? What if he saw the cell phone? What if he became even more violent? On the other hand, I needed proof. I needed to see with my own eyes what my husband did to our daughter. Because part of me still couldn't believe it was as bad as it seemed. Part of me still hoped it was just spankings, that my head was exaggerating. How wrong I was. How terribly, painfully wrong. The decision was made. At the next opportunity I had, I was going to discover the whole truth. And this truth would show me a monster I never imagined existed in my own home, sleeping in my own bed. My dear ones, after that terrible night in March, it took me another week to have the courage to put my plan into action. A whole week where I kept looking at my Samsung phone in the kitchen drawer, thinking, Margaret, you need to do this. It's the only way to know the truth and save your daughter. During that week, I observed Robert with completely different eyes. I saw how he acted normally during the day, greeting neighbors with that wide smile, talking about football with Mr. Peterson from next door, complaining about gas prices at the Shell station. And I wondered how that same man transformed into a monster every night. It was haunting to realize how he managed to maintain that perfect facade. I also observed how Robert interacted with other people during the day. When he met Mrs. Whitmore at the grocery store, he always asked about her grandchildren, complimented the pound cake she made to sell. With the work crew, I'd hear him talking on the phone politely, solving problems, being respectful. How can it be, I thought? How can this same man be so cruel to his own daughter? I watched my daughter with painful attention during those days. Julia barely looked me in the eyes during meals. When I tried to talk about college, about professors, about friends, she always responded with monosyllables. Okay, Mom. Yes, Mom. I don't know, Mom. It was as if she'd learned that the less she spoke, the less trouble she'd have. I noticed things that had previously gone unnoticed, like how Julia always sat sideways in chairs, never fully supporting her back, how she avoided wearing tight jeans, always preferring loose clothing, how she limped slightly in the first hours of morning but tried to disguise it when she noticed I was watching. I also noticed her silent rituals. Every morning when she woke up, Julia would stand still at the edge of the bed for a few minutes, as if mentally preparing to face another day. She always showered with the door locked, something she didn't do when she was younger, and especially, she never hummed while tidying her room anymore, like she did as a child. On the Wednesday of that observation week, something happened that confirmed I was on the right path. I was preparing lunch when I heard Julia crying softly in her room. I went there and asked what had happened. Nothing, Mommy. I was just studying about child development, and there was a chapter about children who suffer violence at home. It made me sad. Sad why, my daughter? Because it must be horrible to live in fear inside your own home, right? Having nowhere to run. Those words completely chilled me. She wasn't talking about the cases in the book. She was talking about her own life. On Thursday of the following week, Robert left for work, as always, at 6 in the morning. He had to go to a new construction site starting in the Kennesaw area, a large 2-story house for Dr. Peterson's family, who was a dentist here in Marietta, and always hired Robert for jobs because he trusted the quality of his work. Julia only had classes in the afternoon that day, from 2 to 6. It was the perfect opportunity. I had breakfast with her. We talked about college subjects. Julia was taking didactics and educational psychology that semester. Mom, did you know there are several types of intelligence? It's not just being good at math or English, she said, animated for the first time in a long time. Really, honey? Tell Mom. There's emotional intelligence, bodily intelligence, musical intelligence. The professor said each child has a different way of learning. I looked at my girl talking about education with such care and thought, how does Robert not see our daughter's intelligence? How does he only see flaws in such a special girl? After Julia left for college at 1:30 in the afternoon, I stood for over half an hour in the living room, breathing deeply, gathering all the courage I needed. I picked up my rosary, said 3 Hail Marys, and asked for protection from Our Lady. Blessed Mother, give me strength to discover the truth and protect my daughter. Thy will be done. My heart was racing when I finally grabbed my cell phone and went to her room. I stood for about 5 minutes at the door, looking inside that space that should be peaceful for a 19-year-old girl, but had become a place of torture. My God, give me strength, I murmured, making the sign of the cross. Help me discover the truth and protect my daughter. I entered the room and observed every detail with heightened attention. The bookshelf was right in front of the bed, in a perfect position to film everything. Julia had always been very studious, despite the difficulties ADHD brought. She had books about child education, didactics, learning psychology, cognitive development. They were thick, heavy books she bought, used at the book fair that happened every month at the town square. I chose 2 very thick volumes, Early Childhood Education and Cognitive Development in Children, and created a perfect little space between them. I tested the angle several times, positioning and repositioning the phone until I was absolutely certain the lens was pointing exactly at the bed. I set the phone to record video at the highest quality possible, checked if there was enough battery, it was charged 100%, put it on silent mode so it wouldn't make any noise when it started recording, and even tested for a minute to see if the audio captured the room sounds well. I still remember exactly the thought that went through my head at that moment. Margaret, after this recording, your life will never be the same. If what you suspect is true, you'll have to make very difficult decisions. If not, at least you'll have peace of mind. Either way, I couldn't stand living in that terrible uncertainty anymore. Done, I thought, after positioning everything perfectly and starting the recording. Tonight, I'll discover what really happens in here. May God give me strength to handle what I'm going to see. I left the room and left everything exactly as it was before. I tidied the house, ironed clothes, prepared lunch ingredients. But everything I did was on autopilot. My head couldn't stop thinking about the phone there, recording the silence of the room, waiting for night to come. The day passed slowly like an eternity. Every time I looked at the kitchen clock, it seemed time had stopped. I prepared lunch with all care: navy beans well seasoned with herbs from the garden, salt-cured ham properly soaked, boiled potatoes with a clove of garlic, and banana pudding that Robert always said was the best in Marietta, trying to act natural but with nerves on edge. During lunch, I observed Robert eating and talking normally. He was worried about the schedule for the new construction, explaining that Dr. Peterson wanted everything done in 4 months to have a birthday party for his wife in the new house. Margaret, you can't imagine the size of this house. It'll have 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a pool. It's really big money. I listened to him talking about work, about money, about plans for the coming months, and thought, is this man here planning the future, the same one who tortures our daughter every night? The dissociation was so perfect, it was frightening. Julia came back from college at 6:30 in the afternoon, carrying a folder full of photocopies and notes. She always tried to study hard, poor thing, even with all the concentration difficulties she faced. She told me she'd had an interesting class about literacy methods, that the professor had shown different techniques to teach children with special needs. Mom, the professor said each child has their own pace, their own way of learning. That we can't force them all to be the same, Julia said, putting books in her backpack. That's true, honey. Each person is unique, has their qualities, I replied, thinking about how Robert never managed to understand that. I watched her from afar, seeing how she behaved in her own room. It was sad to notice how she avoided staying in bed too long, always preferring to study in the small chair near the window. When she needed to get something from the headboard, she did it quickly and left right away. Now I understood why. That bed had become a place of suffering for her. Robert arrived from work at 5:30, as always, with clothes dirty from cement and red dust. He'd spent the day supervising the beginning of the foundation for the new house, instructing the laborers on how to prepare concrete properly. He was tired, complaining about the March heat that already announced the coming summer. He took a long shower, humming a country song that played a lot on the radio at that time. He put on blue shorts and a clean white t-shirt, and came to dinner as if it were just another completely normal day in our family. During dinner, he was even in good spirits, telling stories about problems with construction suppliers. Margaret, can you believe the sand guy wants to push substandard material on me? I told him, Mr. Wilson, do you think I'm an idiot? That sand won't even work for a sandbox. If Dr. Peterson sees a badly plastered wall, he'll never hire me again. I laughed at his stories, participated in the conversation, asked about the other workers, but inside I was terribly nervous. I thought, in a little while, this same man who's here telling jokes is going to transform into a monster, and this time I'll have proof of everything. After dinner, around 8 o'clock, came the usual routine. Robert got up from the table, pushed his chair back, went to the backyard to light his Marlboro cigarette. He stayed there about 10 minutes, looking at the starry sky, taking slow drags, as if mentally preparing for what was coming. When he came back inside the house, that's when he said those words I already knew by heart, but this time made me freeze to my bones. "Margaret, I'm going to talk to the girl." "Okay, Robert." This time, I managed to completely disguise my anxiety. I stayed at the table, finishing my coffee as if it were just another normal night. But internally, it was as if there was a drum beating in my chest. I stayed in the kitchen organizing pans, but with all my senses alert to every sound coming from the hallway. I heard Robert enter our room first. He always went there to get that damned instrument he kept hidden. Then I heard his heavy footsteps through the house's wooden hallway, which always creaked on that loose board near the bathroom. Julia's room door opened with that characteristic squeak of the hinge that needed oil, and finally the dry sound of the key turning in the lock. People, I was never so nervous, and at the same time so determined in my life. My hands trembled washing the same plates for the 4th time, but my mind was focused on one thing. The phone is recording. I'll finally know the whole truth. No matter how terrible it is, I need to see with my own eyes. The terrible routine began as always. First, about 15 minutes of almost total silence. Robert must have been giving his usual instructions to Julia, preparing her for what was coming. I could only hear a low murmur of his voice, but couldn't understand the words. It was always like this. He spoke low, she responded with monosyllables, and then the torture began. Then the sounds I already knew so well started, but this time had a completely different meaning. Whack, whack, whack. With each blow I heard, I thought, it's being recorded. It's being recorded. Finally, there will be proof. Instead of just feeling despair, I also felt a strength growing inside me, a determination I'd never experienced before. Hold on, Margaret, I thought, drying the same plates over and over. Your daughter will be free after tonight. This man will pay for everything he did. An hour and 15 minutes later, I mentally timed every minute of that torture. Robert finally came out of Julia's room. He came to the kitchen walking slowly, as he always did after these sessions. He washed his hands in the sink with that bar soap on the windowsill, dried them with the dish towel, and said with the utmost naturalness in the world, "The girl is learning properly. Today she was well behaved, didn't give any trouble. I think she's finally understanding things." "That's good, Robert," I replied, feigning interest while my stomach turned with disgust. How could he talk like that, as if torturing a 19-year-old daughter was completely normal? Robert went to our room to watch TV, some crime show that always aired at 9. I heard him turn on the television, find the channel, and start laughing at the show's segments. It was surreal. The same man who had just tortured our daughter was there, relaxed, enjoying television. I waited another half hour, hearing him laugh at the show, until I was absolutely certain he was completely distracted. Then, with my heart in my throat and shaky legs, I went to Julia's room. I knocked lightly on the door. "Julia, my love, can I come in?" "You can, Mommy," came her weak voice, muffled by the pillow. I entered and found her lying on her side in bed, still dressed, but clearly hurt. She tried to sit when she saw me, but grimaced in pain and lay back down. "How are you, honey?" "I'm fine, Mommy. Just a little tired from college today." Lie. She wasn't fine at all. But after so many years living that horrible situation, Julia had learned perfectly how to hide pain, to lie to protect me too. I stayed there chatting a few minutes with her about the day's classes, about the coming week's assignments, until I was sure Robert wouldn't come investigate what we were talking about. Then, with extreme care, I approached the bookshelf and got my cell phone back, disguising it as if I were just moving books to arrange them. My God, I thought, looking at that little device that now held definitive proof of what happened in my house every night. Now I'll know the whole truth, however terrible it may be. I went back to the kitchen, told Robert I was going to finish cleaning up from dinner and organize pans for the next morning's breakfast. I locked the kitchen door from inside, something I never did, but I needed total privacy to watch that video. With hands trembling so much I almost dropped the phone on the floor, I opened the video file. The screen loaded for a few seconds that seemed like an eternity, and then it started playing the footage that would change my life forever. My dear ones, what I saw in those 43 minutes of recording destroyed me completely. Destroyed me in a way I never imagined possible. Never, not in my worst nightmares, did I imagine so much cruelty, so much coldness, so much pure evil was possible inside my own home. The video showed Robert entering the room with a piece of wood in his hand. It wasn't a thin rod. It was a thick board, about the width of a broom handle, but rectangular, sanded, that he must have gotten from some construction site and prepared especially for this. It was a torture instrument custom made. Robert ordered Julia to lie face down on the bed and take off her shirt. And then, with the coldness of a butcher, with a calmness that chilled me to the soul, he began to hit my daughter's back and legs. They weren't educational spankings. They were violent blows, calculated, methodically distributed across her body as if it were a job he had to complete. And the worst part, while he hit, he talked. He didn't yell, didn't get agitated, didn't show anger. He spoke low, with a frightening calmness, as if giving a lesson. This is for you to learn what real discipline is. Whack! This is to take the laziness out of your body. Whack! Your mother is too soft with you. That's why I have to do the job right. Whack! If you don't learn now, you'll become lost like other girls your age. Whack! Julia cried softly, trying to muffle her moans of pain in the pillow, writhing with each blow. And Robert continued, systematically, hitting every part of her body that wouldn't show when she wore clothes. When she tried to move to escape the pain, he held her by the hair with one hand and continued hitting with the other. Stay still. If you move, it'll be worse, much worse. People, I was watching my own husband torture my daughter with the coldness of a professional executioner. It wasn't loss of control. It wasn't momentary anger. It was pure sadism, planned, executed with terrible precision. Robert felt pleasure in causing pain, in having total control over another person. The video lasted 43 full minutes. 43 minutes of systematic, cruel, inhuman torture. At the end, Robert put away the damned wood behind Julia's own closet. That's where he kept the instrument hidden, not in our room as I thought, and left calmly, leaving my daughter thrown on the bed, trembling with pain and terror. When the video ended, I ran to the bathroom and vomited. I threw up everything in my stomach, and then continued dry heaving from so much disgust. My body completely rejected that horrible reality. I sat on the cold bathroom floor and cried like I'd never cried in my life. But along with the crying and disgust came something I hadn't felt in years. Courage, a furious courage, determined, relentless. It wasn't just sadness I was feeling. It was anger. A righteous anger of someone who finally understood they had to act, whatever the cost. I went back to the kitchen, grabbed my cell phone with hands still trembling, entered the file menu, and sent that video to the cloud, to Google Drive that my brother Thomas had taught me to use a few months earlier. Then I saved a copy to my email and even sent it to myself on WhatsApp. If Robert discovered and broke my phone, the video would still be safe in 3 different places. The next morning, Friday, Robert left early as always, at 6 o'clock sharp, to get to the construction site before the other workers. As soon as I heard him turn the corner with that characteristic sound of his truck, I grabbed the house phone and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. "Hello, police? I need to report a very serious crime. My husband has been torturing our daughter for years, and I have filmed proof." The operator immediately connected me to the detective on duty. I explained the situation in full detail, and he said in a serious voice, "Ma'am, can you come to the station today? Bring the footage and your daughter's ID. We'll arrange for immediate arrest." "Yes, I can. I'll be there right away." I woke Julia, who was sleeping deeply because of the medicine I'd given her the night before. I quickly explained what had happened, that I'd filmed everything, that we were finally going to be free. At first, she was desperate. "Mommy, what if Dad finds out? What if he gets even angrier? What if he does worse to me?" "My dear daughter, there won't be any more anger. Today your father will be arrested for torture. This is over. Over forever, my love." Around 10 in the morning, Julia and I were at the Marietta Police Department in a small room with air conditioning that didn't work quite right. I showed the complete video to Detective James Richardson, a man about 50 years old, serious, who was visibly shocked and outraged by what he saw. "Ma'am," he said after watching about 10 minutes, "I don't need to see anything more. This is a very serious case of assault and qualified torture. We're going to issue a warrant for preventive detention immediately. This man is a danger to society." 2 hours later, while Robert was having coffee at the construction site where he worked, surrounded by fellow workers and helpers, 3 police cars arrived with sirens on. 6 officers got out, and Detective Richardson personally made the arrest. "Robert Davenport? You're under arrest for aggravated assault and torture of a minor." Robert tried to resist, shouted that it was all lies, that I was crazy, that I'd set a trap for him. But when the officers showed they had the video as irrefutable proof of the crime, he went completely silent, turned white as paper. The entire neighborhood, the construction workers, everyone saw Robert leaving in handcuffs, being placed in the back of the patrol car like a common criminal. Everyone talked about it for weeks. Who would have thought Robert, so hardworking, so respected, was such a monster inside his home? And so, that Friday in March 2014, after nearly 20 years of silent suffering, my daughter was finally free. We were free. And Robert, for the first time in his life, was going to answer for the cruel acts he committed against our family. My dear ones, today, 11 years after that Friday that changed our lives forever, I can say we're living in peace. True peace. I'm 52 years old, my Julia is 30 now, and our life here in Marietta is simple, but full of joy. Robert was sentenced to 12 years in prison for torture and aggravated assault. He served 8 years at a Georgia state prison and was released in 2022. When we learned he'd been released, Julia and I were nervous, but he never showed up here again. We heard through others that he moved to another state, far from Georgia. And may he be happy far from us. Today I live in the same house in the Kennesaw subdivision where everything happened, but I transformed it completely. I painted it light yellow, a cheerful color that brought new life to the walls. I moved all the furniture around, especially in Julia's room. Where her bed used to be, there's now a beautiful study desk I bought when she went back to school. Because my Julia, my dear ones, managed to graduate. Yes, she completed her education degree in 2018, 4 years after her father's arrest. It was difficult because the trauma had greatly affected her concentration, but with psychological counseling and lots of love, she succeeded. Today she works as a teacher's aide at a preschool here in downtown Marietta. The pay is modest, but she loves what she does. Seeing Julia working with children is an emotion I can't explain. She has patience, special care with little ones who've been through difficulties. It's as if the pain she lived through became a strength to help other children. The school principal always praises her work. Julia still lives with me, and that's okay. Because of ADHD and everything she went through, she prefers the security of having her mother nearby. She's dated some young men, but nothing serious yet. She says she's focused on healing completely before building a family, and I respect her timeline. As for me, I continue making my homemade breads, which became famous in the neighborhood. Every Friday, I make a batch of cornbread that I sell to neighbors. The money helps with the budget and mainly gives me a good feeling of independence. I never want to be completely dependent on any man again. On free afternoons, I embroider tablecloths that I sell at the Saturday farmers market. It's delicate work that calms my mind and still earns some money. I learned to value these moments of peace, these simple things I couldn't properly enjoy before. My routine today is blessed with tranquility. I wake up early, make coffee for Julia and me. She goes to work. I take care of the house and my tasks. At night, we watch television together, talk about our day, about plans. These are conversations we never had before because fear always hung over our house. Julia was in therapy for 4.5 years. It was fundamental for her to understand that nothing she suffered was her fault. The therapist explained that victims of domestic violence always carry guilt that isn't theirs. Seeing my daughter free herself from that guilt too was one of the greatest joys of my life. Today, when I look back, I feel immense gratitude for having had courage that day in March. If I hadn't filmed, if I hadn't reported, Julia would still be suffering. Or worse, Robert could have killed her in one of those violent beatings. I learned that we can never accept violence as normal. No matter how difficult it is to report, no matter how much fear we have, it's always better than continuing to live in hell. Our dignity is worth more than any financial or social comfort. My relationship with Julia today is one of total complicity. We're mother and daughter, but also friends, companions in struggle. She invites me to watch movies on the couch, tells me about her students, asks my advice about clothes. These are simple gestures that didn't exist before because fear dominated our house. Financially, we live simply, but without need. Julia earns her teacher's aide salary, I have my breads and embroidery, and I still receive a small pension that the state pays me as compensation for what we went through. It's not much, but it's enough for two women who learned to value truly important things in life. And the important things, we discovered, aren't material possessions. They're the peace of sleeping calmly, the joy of waking without fear, the freedom to talk loudly inside the house, to laugh, to cry when needed, to simply be who we are. My dear ones, if you or someone you know is going through a situation similar to what I lived through, I want to say something very important. You're not alone. And especially, it's not your fault. For years, I blamed myself for not noticing earlier, for not acting sooner, for letting my daughter suffer so long. But I learned that fear paralyzes us in a way only those who live it understand. What's important isn't when you discover. What's important is that you discover and act. When I saw that terrible video, I understood I had to choose. Either I continued pretending not to see, or I saved my daughter. I chose to save my daughter, and it was the best decision of my life. Because today, 11 years later, I can look in the mirror and know I was the mother my Julia needed me to be. If you're experiencing violence at home, know that help exists. In any country in the world, there are authorities ready to protect you. In the United States, you can call 911 or seek help at your local police department. Look for local domestic violence resources and organizations that can help. I learned that violence is never normal, never education, never love. Love protects, doesn't hurt. Love cares, doesn't threaten. If someone hits you, humiliates you, threatens you, that's not love. It's violence, and violence is a crime everywhere. My life taught me we're stronger than we imagine. I, a simple housewife from Marietta, managed to confront a violent man and protect my daughter. If I could do it, anyone can. Courage isn't not being afraid. Courage is being afraid and acting anyway. Today, when I see Julia working with children, being affectionate, being free, I know all the pain was worth it. Because breaking the cycle of violence isn't just saving one person, it's saving future generations. My Julia will never raise a child in fear because she knows the difference between discipline and torture. For the mothers listening to me, observe your children. If they're always scared, always hurt, always sad, investigate. Sometimes violence is closer to us than we imagine. And remember, protecting our children is our greatest responsibility as mothers. And for you who made it this far, who heard this whole painful story, I have a special request. My dear warriors who had the courage and determination to watch this grandmother from Marietta's complete story. You who understood the importance of reporting domestic violence, help me spread this message of hope. Subscribe to Grandparents' Tales now and turn on notifications, because each subscription helps this story reach more people who need courage to act. Leave a comment below writing just courage. That way, I'll know you watched to the end and understood the message. Do it now. Don't wait another minute. Your action could save a life. Life is too precious to be wasted in fear. Choose freedom, choose peace, choose dignity, always.